I'm sorry, but I don't want to be an emperor. That's not my business. In this world, there's room for everyone, and the good earth is rich and can provide for everyone. The way of life can be free and beautiful, but we have lost the way. Greed has poisoned men's souls, has barricaded the world with hate. We think too much and feel too little. We think too much and feel too little. More than machinery, we need humanity. More than cleverness, we need kindness. Without these qualities, life will be violent. And all will be lost. All will be lost. Do not despair. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die. Dictators die. And the power they took from the people will return to the people. Will return to the people. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world to do away with greed. Now let us fight to free the world, to fulfill that promise. Let us all unite.
Welcome, folks, to the Corporation Nation radio program. I'm Clint, your host. It is the 22nd of April, 2014, a Tuesday. Very special guest today is Dave Hodges. Dave Hodges can actually be heard on Sundays on Republic Broadcasting. Welcome to the show, sir.
Well, I'm glad to be here on the greatest network in America.
Common Sense, thecommonsenseshow.com is Dave's website, where he has a lot of his articles. Now, Dave, you're going to kill me here. I had my computer all set to go today, and I just had to reset everything. And I'm actually looking now, unfortunately, for the title of the article that you wrote. It was actually posted on the RBN website, and I was so excited to see it because someone finally gets it. Someone finally actually gets the concept that the fact that we have guns, it's almost like having pop guns. What was the name of the article you recently wrote?
The window to resist tyranny is closing due to the new super weapons.
That's it. I recognize the title. Explain what you're saying by that, because I happen to agree with you, although I'm not sure the window hasn't already been closed. I remember when Putin came out and everybody thought it was a joke, and of course there's patents to show this, and I've been a victim of it myself. Just walking through New York when I used to live there almost a decade ago, there was a sign on the side of a building, and when you walked past it, it was actually a show that was basically advertising for a new show on ghosts and paranormal stuff, and they actually beamed voices and ghostly sounds into the heads of people who were passing by. Freakiest thing I've ever seen, because you just watch people and you see everybody kind of stop and look around, and they had to get rid of it real quick because people complained. But this is the kind of stuff that we're really talking about when we're talking about weapons. We are in fourth generation warfare at this point, which is more of the psychological and robotic and stuff that's so advanced that we can't even comprehend half the time. And most of the quote-unquote patriots out there are still walking around with, they're proud of their AK-57s and their AR-15s and their handguns. But I don't think that people really comprehend fully what the government actually has, what DARPA and what's that, Boston Dynamics and all of these companies are actually creating. And I really wanted to invite you on today because you wrote such a wonderful article. And go ahead, man. Tell people, please explain to people, what does Putin mean when he says that by 2020 we're going to have developed a zombie gun, turning whole armies into basically zombies that can't do a darn thing to fight
that relates a lot to what you just were talking about in the opening, and that really what you refer to as the voice-to-skull technology.
Yep.
And the first guy that I ever saw that wrote about that was Dr. Nick Begich, who wrote a really good book called Angels Don't Play This Harp. HAARP, in honor of the program up there called HARP. And Nick had brought out the patents on this and showed conclusively that this technology worked. In fact, in I believe it was 1997, and I've interviewed Nick a couple of times on this, Nick was actually invited to the European Union to demonstrate the technology, and they were stunned. They passed resolutions against the usage of it in the EU. I don't think it's probably being followed, but that's what you're talking about. So diving into what you said, or you referenced Putin's comments about the zombie gun, what we know about that, and it's not something I actually wrote about in this article, but I have written about it in other articles. If you go back to about 1961, there was a Spanish physiologist named Jose Delgado, and he had the most interesting bullfight. In fact, you can actually look this up on YouTube, and there's a YouTube video of it, and I play it in my psychology classes. Jose had a bull charge him, and previously he had electrodes surgically implanted into the hypothalamus and limbic system of a bull that would control anger and its emotions, and he pressed a button. It emitted a frequency, and the bull calmly walked away. And then he demonstrated this technology when he was at Yale. He was brought over by Yale, which we know is a globalist think tank organization, and he demonstrated the technology on people, on cats and dogs. And in 1968, his research trail stopped, and he went to work for Stanford Research Institute in Palo Alto. And we now know today that was a CIA cover, and he was working on mind control operations. He resurfaced last decade, the middle of the decade, about a year before his death, and he lamented what he had contributed. And he was bound by his national security oath not to reveal details, but he said, we should not be messing with the minds of human beings. So how far have they gone with this? Well, it's really anyone's guess. I mean, I know what the rumors are out there, but unlike the article that I just wrote, we can't really tell what all they're capable of. The rumors are out there. What I suspect he developed and what the CIA has are broad spectrum beam weapons that are HARP-related, and they can affect an entire population, or narrow beam that could tie into a person and lock onto them through their DNA, their iris retina scan. By the way, you know there are satellites in space that can read the encryption on a dime through a rainstorm, and that information is 40 years old. So you can imagine what that technology is like today in terms of how they could follow you with an iris scan. And so can they affect your mind? I think unquestionably that is true. So that's not something that I really wrote about in this particular article, but I think this is what Putin's referring to with the zombie gun.
Yeah, absolutely. There was also, what was his name? Bearden. It was a Colonel Bearden, I can't remember his first name, who wrote years ago about all the different applications of zero-point energy and, you know, the energy from the void, these energy weapons that can be used for everything from mind control to completely killing everything. I remember reading about experiments they did in Vietnam where they would... I mean, it was so powerful that it killed every possible microorganism in the area, and so the bodies wouldn't even decompose because it kills literally everything. Nothing is left alive, and so there's no micro, flora or anything to actually start decomposing the bodies. And I'm just like, wow, that was in Vietnam. So like you say, we're in 2014 at this point. So when we get back from the break, we'll we'll go a little deeper into this, into what we know exists. And I'll tell you, if you haven't watched any of these Boston Dynamics videos, if you haven't seen some of the robots, just the robots alone that they've been developing, it's frightening. It is an assault on reason. Why? After so many movies have been made, after so many novels have been published, the only thing you can think, of course, is that those novels weren't a warning, but more of a historical outlook as to what was coming in the future. We'll be back, folks. Stay with us. Dave Hodges from The Common Sense Show here on RBN on Sundays. Stay tuned.
Reality.
First of all, let me take just a moment to thank you for allowing me back into your homes. If this is your first time with us, let me extend a personal invitation. Let's build a happy little cloud. Let's build some happy little trees. There are no limits here. You start out by believing here is a your world. You're the creator. Find freedom on this canvas. Believe that you can do it. Because you can do it.
Welcome back, folks. You're in the Corporation Nation, and we are talking about, with Dave Hodges of the CommonSenseShow.com, we're talking about, all sorts of weapons that make basically our little guns that we so covet and worship from that Second Amendment basically look like a bunch of rubber band shooters. Now, I was just out of curiosity, I typed in the words directed energy weapons into my little search browser, and let me just tell you what came up. Now, you go to Wikipedia and you can do all that, or you can go to military.com. Let me read you a few of the, it says energy weapon videos that you can watch. Navy's new laser heading to the Middle East. A smart kid makes death ray robot. Another one that you'll burn your eye out, kid. Army test vehicle-mounted laser. British Army laser tag. A laser Gatling gun creates balloon massacre. In other words, they were shooting balloons with a laser Gatling gun. ADAM, A-D-A-M, which stands for... it's a high-energy laser beam, basically, destroys target. How solid-state lasers work. Navy laser going to Persian Gulf. Laser mounted on warship. Laser weapon system laws. Real-life sharks with lasers attached to them. NASA wants to make a tractor beam from space, from satellite. Airborne laser killing ICBMs. It just goes on and on and on. Raytheon, one of my least favorite companies out there, of course, which government controls through stock investment, as we've talked about. Raytheon laser zaps a Navy UAV. Then we can go over to Popular Science, popsci.com, where it's directed energy weapons. Army trucks shoots drones, mortars with lasers. Airport-mounted laser weapon project for North Korea. L.A. prison using experimental controversial pain ray to keep inmates in line. Raytheon's ship-mounted laser weapon incinerates a UAV in flight. I mean, it just goes on and on, folks. And this is just basically one aspect of an entire series that I wanted to have our guest today, Dave Hodges, expound upon. This is very real. And when you read a headline like using experimental controversial pain ray to keep inmates in line, you got to start thinking, well, yeah, that could come from any source from any amount of miles away where your guns just will not reach. What do you think, Dave?
Well, you've nailed two of the weapon systems by my count, maybe three. One of them that got my attention was something called Excalibur. And this is a plane. It's classified about how high this plane will fly. I will tell you, from the 60s, my father worked on reverse engineering technology they got from the Germans, and he worked directly with some of the Germans at Martin Marietta, which is today Lockheed Martin, in Littleton, Colorado, in the mountains outside of Denver, suburban Denver. And he said the stuff we had could escape Earth velocity without the use of booster rockets, and this was back in the early 60s. So then his next stop was Sunstrand Electric, and their specialty was satellite-based communications and tracking. So I think you see the link there. But anyway, back to the Excalibur. It's called a laser defense system, and it is capable of tracking and shooting down, after disarming, inbound ICBMs. It can be pilot-operated, but it's most operated remotely as a drone, and they are equipped with facial recognition software which is capable, as I mentioned earlier, of reading the inscription of a dime from 100 miles away.
Well, gee, Dave, why would something that's designed to shoot down enemy missiles need to have facial recognition?
Well, the implication for hunting down and dealing with political dissidents like you and I think that's pretty obvious.
Okay, just making sure we're on the same page.
We are. This is total control of society. These weapon systems right now are operational but have not been deployed in the numbers sufficient enough. I would liken it this. If you recall, with the end days of World War II, we were having our B-17 shot out of the skies by German jets with regularity. It's just that the Germans couldn't produce enough of them to turn back the tide. And this is where I think DARPA is. And you had mentioned something, too, about L.A. prisons working on high-tech crowd control measures in their prisons. And I think what you're referring to is the heat ray, and it controls the electromagnetic spectrum. And they just simply call it heat ray, and it's a weapon that blasts intruders with a wave beam that targets the skin, and it makes these victims feel like they've stepped in front of a blazing oven. And oftentimes it doesn't kill them. It can be fatal. And it has a range up to 1,000 meters, which is about 7 football fields. So you have a real effective crowd control measure. You could kind of nudge people to those infamous free speech zones at political activities, I think.
Well, and that's just it. I worked in Hollywood. One of the reasons I quit Hollywood is exactly what we're talking about today, and I'll get into that later. But, you know, I was telling the audience last week we had a war protest, and I was part of We Are Change out there in L.A. Before it got subverted. And, you know, we're there, and we're looking at this octagonal thing they had, and I went up and talked to the police, and you know, they were worried about me. They had this thing under control. They had a big heat ray right there. Same thing I saw. By the way, this was featured on 60 Minutes. So it's not like we're talking out of our collective rear ends here. We're talking about real things here. And again, Dave, that's why I wanted to have you on today, because you put together such a fabulous representation of the many different control methods through these weapons. Excuse me, again, the article is called "The Window to Resist Tyranny is Closing Due to the New Super Weapons." And I can't think of a more true statement than that, plus the research that you put in here. So well done, sir.
Well, there's for people who are doubting Thomases, I would also mention I not only have the documentation with the hypertext links in this article, but I also have pictures of this stuff. The heat ray looks like a Civil War miniature version of a Civil War Gatling gun. That's what it put me in the mind of. And we've got a picture of Excalibur firing a laser beam weapon up there. But what really got my attention, and you alluded to this earlier, was the robot soldiers. I've got a headless robot on a treadmill. Yeah. And this thing can actually get up to speeds of 30 miles an hour. Now, one of my insider military sources actually knew something about this. And he says, what do you think we're going to use it for? And I said, running down dissidents. I don't know. And he says, no. He said, when the bad guys sweep a neighborhood and they haven't been able to get people enticed into coming into the FEMA camps through food or grabbing their kids at school on a disaster drill like they did Operation Mountain Guardian in 2011 in Denver, and then they come in, they sweep a neighborhood for the stragglers. And he says, once they've done the sweep, then it's time to send in the robots. And I said, well, what will the robots do? And he said, they would only have one mission, search and destroy. And they can run faster than a bear, so you're not going to outrun them. They have facial recognition software, and they're programmed to do two things. One is to follow directions like a drone, but they're also autonomous, so we can talk about that when we come back.
Yeah, we'll be back real quick. Yeah, it's very scary. Stay tuned. welcome back. Oh, going deep here today. This is something, we often challenge on this show, especially, as my listeners know, we challenge the notion of things like patriotism and constitutionalism and all that good stuff. We challenge these belief systems that have been ingrained into us. And meanwhile, of course, in the background, what we're talking about today is happening at such a quickening, the pace is of technology leading to what some call the singularity. It's becoming so frightening, the pace, that I think the things that we can comprehend today were already built yesterday, and the things that we're only imagining tomorrow are already here. And that's the scary part. Now, let's talk about these robot soldiers. There's a company called Boston Dynamics. I'm sure if anybody's ever seen a video on these robots that they're creating, it's probably coming from a company like Boston Dynamics, a huge government contractor. These things are scary when you see them, but when they start putting fatigues on them, and they start looking very much like soldiers who can be pushed around and balance themselves, climb up rocks, and basically be controlled by a host through a virtual reality type of gizmo, it becomes a whole new... It's not just entertainment anymore. It's not just, oh, that's cool. This is very frightening. So, Dave, let's talk about these robots.
On one hand, these robots have great utility. If I were in the military in a combat zone, these robots could form the vanguard of a scout mission. They could do the point work where humans are at risk now. They could be in the first vehicle driving down a road in Afghanistan and be the first ones taken out by an IED, thus protecting the humans. So this is something that I think it's kind of a two-edged sword. It begs the old question, is technology evil? Well, actually, I think technology is neutral. It's the application that can make it evil. So it has great utility for military uses. On the negative side, I already mentioned one way it could be used. It could be used in cleanup operations, and humans wouldn't stand a chance. How do you take one of these things out? I've been told that you could only take them out maybe like a double-aught at close range, but with their surveillance capabilities and their facial recognition and their weaponized systems, how would you even get close enough to do that?
Well, and that's the other aspect I want to talk about, which is the concept, because one of the points you make in this article is the fact that you're not going to be able to use the traditional guerrilla tactics. You're not going to be able to hide in the woods, or you're not even going to be able to hide in your basement unless you've got a copper fence around your basement, or you actually have been smart enough to save some lead paint and paint your, there's a real good reason why they didn't want people to have lead paint anymore, and that's because it interferes with all this technology we're talking about.
Not anymore.
There is no hiding from what they've got. We're going to talk about that probably in the next segment, but... So these robots, it's not as if they're not going to know where people are. There's not going to be hiding or sniping. Everything that's alive and putting off a heat signature, or God forbid, the smart dust, smart technology, you're going to be a known entity. And that's the important part to this. So these robots, you're not going to surprise them. You're not going to surprise the military. There is no element of surprise left, and that's the scary part.
Well, the question is who controls DARPA, and that's really kind of a side issue for our discussion right now. But could the military bifurcate and lead a revolution? Yes. Could they be armed with some of this stuff? Absolutely. Who's controlling DARPA now? Is it the military that's not on real good terms with Obama, or is it Homeland Security? And that's a question I ask people, and if you ask 10 people that question who might know, you're going to get 11 different answers. So the real key here is who controls DARPA. But you're absolutely right about these battlefield weapons. The old idea of insurgency at night, and you go undetected and you carry out your missions of terrorism and creating instability, those could be gone. I mean, they've got this technology called LACOST, which stands for Large Area Coverage Optical Search while Track and Engage. How do you like that for a title? But what it basically does, it puts down a broad beam over a metropolitan area or even an area that's rural, and it ties into video surveillance on the ground, traffic cam surveillance on the ground, and something called IntelliStreets, which is being beta tested now. And I think they're done with a beta test in Farmington Hills, Michigan. It's also operational in Birmingham, England. And these are light poles that actually speak to you. If you start to jaywalk, it'll say, Clint, get back on the street now, or we'll issue you a citation. And these are actually programmed to do that. They scan you for weapons. Good morning, Mr. Jones. How are you today? And these things will talk to you. It's total surveillance by light poles, and people can actually Google this. It's called IntelliStreets. And this optical surveillance, some of it's being done from blimps, excuse me, some of it's being done from satellite, and it's less accurate. But they tie into all these surveillance systems on a city, and they have night vision capabilities, so there's really nowhere that you're going to run and hide. I mean, even the department stores now with their video surveillance are being increasingly required by Homeland Security to tie into this. So that's one aspect they have. Now, you mentioned, too, about battlefield guerrilla tactics being negated. You're right. They've got something called the BOSS, Battlefield Optical Surveillance System. And this is a surveillance system that works through satellites, or doesn't have to work through satellites, but it can catch like the glint of a scope of a rifle, and it also can recognize you through your retinas because they've got facial recognition. And as soon as they do that and they go, oh, this is an enemy intruder, I mean, within a millisecond, it's painted you with a laser beam and you're dead within seconds. So this is an amazing development. I've got a picture of that on my website. And then there's the boomerang. And if you come in and you, let's say the unlikely event that you're able to get off a shot that the boss doesn't detect, boomerang steps in, and they know what you've shot, where you've shot from, your precise range, and then they just order up some kind of weapon. Could be a Hellfire missile if it's a crowd. It could be just an individual return of fire, but it's 100% accurate. These are smart bullets. They can go around corners, and they just track the target that's already been marked by a laser beam. So this is called boomerang. So when we talk about battlefield tactics of guerrillas being negated, can you imagine if we'd have had this technology in Vietnam, what we could have done to the Viet Cong? We'd have stopped them in their tracks.
Well, but like, unfortunately, like the Viet Cong, like Iraq, like Pakistan, Afghanistan, and the other 50 countries we've invaded and occupied without cause, without, unfortunately, we've discussed the Labor Code. We've discussed the concept that the reason there's military bases here in all 50 states is because we are a military-occupied bunch of countries, 50 countries. So this is what we're talking about is very realistic. Unfortunately, there is no. When you have a bunch of psychopaths in charge of this stuff, in other words, a bunch of people without the empathy gene, you should be expecting this in your own neighborhood. And so I guess the most important aspect of this, I hope you agree with me here, is to point this out to people so that when they go and they are romanticized by such movies as Red Dawn, which they just remade, and these alien invasion movies, do you really think that they're making these movies for entertainment, or do you think they're making them to say, hey, look, people, you can hide from us and you'll be fine. You can fight against us from the trees and you'll win the battle. There's a bit of programming going on with these movies that are coming out, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I had an interesting discussion with Doug Hagman and Steve Quayle last night about that very thing. And I think what we're looking at here, it's a desensitization move, and it's getting us used to it, so when it's really rolled out in our face, we won't question it. Elysium was a really good movie that showed the total bifurcation of society with the haves and the have-nots. There's a new movie out, and the name has jumped out of my head. It's not doing real well in the box office, but it's on the money. And, of course, there's the trilogy of the Hunger Games, of which 2 of the 3 books have been made into movies. And if people want to know what it's like to live under Agenda 21, those are your movies.
Yeah, I'd say so. Science fiction coming to life. Here's our subject today. Stay tuned, folks, for more Dave Hodges of thecommonsenseshow.com.
Scientists have been battling to understand what this unappealing object is all about. What the object is all about.
Information in the form of energy streams in simultaneously through all of our sensory systems in the form of energy. And then it explodes into this enormous collage.
All right, folks, welcome back.
What this present...
Oh, someone just sent me a link in the chat room. Our chat room is Corporation Nation. That's corporationnation.chatango.com. That's CHATANGO. Always some good stuff going on in there. Just sent a link to dangerousthings.com. And pretty scary stuff going on. It says, we believe biohacking is the forefront of a new generation. So it's really the forefront of a new kind of human evolution. Biohacking, basically talking about implants, unlock doors with just a wave of your hand because you've got the right implant in your hand, just like the Bible tells us about. Oh, dear God. And, of course, if you're one of these people, Dave, that are being picked up upon with the technology that we're about to talk about, and you don't have one of these chips, then you're going to show up as a target instead of a friend to these these robots or these radars that they're using. And, boy, it's we're basically right now, I think you'll agree with me, Dave, after doing this research, that we are on the threshold of basically no turning back.
Well, certainly no overcoming the powers that be. Now, technology can be fleeting. So if they don't gain absolute and total control through this technology, you would expect their pendulum to swing back to the other side a little bit, and some of the rebel forces or would-be rebel forces will get some of this technology by hook or crook, and then the fight will be on. But the devastation that the globalists can bring to the American people when they fully operationalize these technologies is phenomenal. They got this one weapon, I'm trying to think of the name of it here. It's I don't even know if it has a name, but what they showed was like a Humvee or fortified armor car going down the road, and someone shooting an RPG at it. So it's a live test fire. It's on film. And the craft got struck, and it jumped a little bit, but it's kind of like that old Timex commercial. It took a licking and kept on ticking. So, I mean, they're even immune to RPG attacks.
Well, it's a defense system, so it's actually making the missile explode before it even impacts, right?
Well, there seemed to be, okay, now what I don't know is this, and you couldn't tell from watching the video released by Darpa. The vehicle did jump a little bit. Now, is that from actual impact or from the sound blast waves?
From the shock wave? I assume it's the shock wave because it has to be shooting the missile. It's making it explode somehow before it hits. It's almost like a shield, but it's not a shield. It's like it's a directed energy beam of some kind that's making the thing explode before it actually hits the truck. So the shock is not as powerful as. It's just the question really one might want to ask is, okay, well, gee, that's great that they've developed that. Why aren't they actually utilizing it where they should be if they have this technology? And why are they letting our soldiers die? And, of course, we kind of know the answer to that because every soldier has a multi-million-dollar health insurance policy that gets collected by government every time a soldier dies. So that makes a little conflict of interest. But,
what's bigger than that, too?
Yeah,
I don't want to pull any punches here. I'm going to be very clear. we're staring down a window here, a 5 or 6 week window, where if Obama lets these NATO war games go off in Moldova, Bulgaria, Poland, and Ukraine, NATO will be entrenched militarily, and Putin's grand design of rolling over Ukraine in less than 3 days could really be threatened. So we're in a window opportunity here for World War III. These war games by NATO are supposed to take place between about mid-June to mid-July in various countries, and Putin can't let this happen. And you'll start to see troop and material deployment by June 1st. So I wrote an article yesterday called 5 Weeks to World War III. Now, I'm not really predicting the war. I'm saying there's a window here where Putin has to make a decision. Is he going to push the envelope and just go for broken attack before NATO can be entrenched? Or is he going to just basically kind of wait out the U.S., continue to destroy the petrodollar by trying to control as much energy around the planet and using the BRIC nation allies to do so? That's where we're at right now. Now, what's Obama doing? This is the point that I'm getting to. Obama, what he's doing is knowing that World War III is right here, right now, potentially in this window of opportunity, he's reducing the size of the military to pre-World War II levels. That's insanity. And if you go back 4 years ago when he was just in office for a year, he gave away 7 oil-rich Alaskan islands, 2 of which can be used to launch an amphibious invasion of Alaska. I mean, how far do you want me to go on with these examples? We are being sold out by our leadership, and we're being set up for defeat. So there's absolutely no question. So we may not even get to the stage where we have to see DHS deploying these weapons for controlling Americans. We may be defeated before that comes. Let me mention another weapon system, though, that this one to me is the most frightening. Of all the things we've talked about so far, this gets my vote is the number one scariest item that's out there. DARPA calls it micro-aerial vehicles, and the Air Force refers to them as flybots. And so what you have is a mini drone that flies over a location, and it opens up and it releases up to 100,000 micro drones. And they can be the size of an insect all the way up to the size of a bird. And 100,000 of these all communicate with each other. They can carry out a joint mission, a collective mission, or they can carry out individual missions or several missions at once in concert with several different groups within the 100,000 colony of these micro-aerial vehicles. And can you imagine you're in some defensive position? You're the Red Dawn people defending against whatever tyranny is in your neighborhood, and all of a sudden this drone launches 100,000 micro-aerial vehicles, each one capable of killing. There's no defense for this.
Well, and the amazing thing is the video itself, which went out a long time ago. I remember Walter Burien sent this out because he was so concerned with it. They're so small, and yet they show them literally with a needle injecting something into. Of course, they portray an Arab, I think, in here. But yes. the point is, it just sits there and waits, and when it finally, it literally injects something into you. This stuff is crazy.
Well, it even goes farther than that. Not just the needle; they can kill you and make it look like it was natural causes, a la Breitbart.
Well, that too, and then of course they're tracking devices. So once it lands on you, and you know, all of a sudden you have something on you that shows your location. I mean, the capabilities of this stuff are endless, and it's like I said, it's just science fiction coming absolutely full force true.
Well, the video that's on my website, in this article, actually demonstrates the technology at work.
Yeah.
It shows these actual things being deployed, and then you get into some animation where they talked about killing someone who's basically depicted as an Arab. But it can be armed. It can kill you with a laser. It can kill you electromagnetically. And these are so small that some of them are the size of small insects, so they can come under doorways and the cracks in a door. And so there's nowhere to run. There's nowhere to hide from these kinds of weapons.
And just to be clear, this video is not just something that was made by some person. These are micro-air vehicles from the Air Force Research Laboratory. That's what this video is. This is an official video, not just something that someone made in their garage or trying to pull a hoax. And it's been around for a very, very long time. If people have not gone and at least looked at some of the robots that are DARPA and Boston Dynamics and all of these things, boy, you're in for a shock, I got to tell you. And the reason, again, I have Dave Hodges on here, he wrote this thing, and I have the same sentiment as some of the commenters. I've been waiting for someone to write an article like this to explain to people that their approach, their concept of what it's going to be like is not realistic. That your guns, of course they're going to let you have guns. They're not worried about your guns. Your guns are basically useless. So go ahead, man. Worship the Second Amendment. It's not going to do... Oh, boy, it's frustrating. I don't want to sound pessimistic here, but my God, look at this stuff, people. We have to stop this before it's implemented, I guess is the point. And we have to get to our military before they start using it against us. We'll be back, folks. The Corporation Nation, stay tuned.
Soldiers, don't give yourselves to brutes. Men who despise you, enslave you, tell you what to do, what to think, and what to feel. Who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men. Machine men with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines, you are men. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful. Choose that power to make this life a wonderful adventure. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world to do away with greed. A world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness. Do not despair. The hate of men will pass and dictators die. And the power they took from the people will return to the people. Let us all unite.
Welcome back, folks, to the Corporation Nation. This is Clint, your host, and my special guest today is Dave Hodges. Dave, now, your website, again, as we mentioned, is thecommonsenseshow.com. Why don't you tell people a little bit about your background and how they can tune in to listen to you here on RBN?
Okay, I'd be happy to. Thank you. I'm on Sunday evenings from 9 p.m. to midnight, all of our times on RBN or Central. And I have a co-host and a news director, Andy DeRiso, and we do what good RBN people do, which is to explore the topical issues that really serve to threaten our constitutional liberties. And today, I'd say they're getting close to threatening more than that. They're threatening our lives with their long-range plans. So every Sunday night, I have a website in the same name, thecommonsenseshow.com. I write the majority of the articles. Occasionally, I'll bring some outside contributors in if I like what they do. And these articles, like my show, are topical to the time that we're in. And also, occasionally, if I have a particular good hour or two, I'll run some of the archives up there and tie them into a story. And the address for that, again, is thecommonsenseshow.com. And we got our hands full. My background, by trade, I'm an educator, and I was a high school basketball and football coach for a while, evolved into a men's college head basketball coach. I did that for a number of years. And lo and behold, about 12 years ago, and I've told this story many times on my show, the forces of John McCain and the globalists who were behind the Canamex corridor as a result of the Central American Free Trade Agreement had designs on my rural property and that of about 300 of my neighbors, incorporating 2,000 people. And I made a pretty good splash across the nation as I became the spokesperson for our group. And I started appearing on various outlets, and I got offered a radio spot to do my first show up in Wickenburg with the late Pete Peterson. And a short time later, I talked to Michael Powers and John, and ended up coming on RBN a little over almost 6.5 years ago now, and the rest is history, as they say. So the reason I decided to turn this into a long-term endeavor, because we won our battle against McCain, at least for the time being, is this was my portal of entry into really understanding the fact that when we are opposing the globalists, the purveyors of Agenda 21 and depopulation, we're not just fighting an issue here or there. We're fighting an entire system. We are fighting a tyrannical way of life, and they have made great inroads, and they control from within and from without. The only thing it seems like they don't control is our soul and our free will, but they're working on that, too, through some of this technology.
Well, I want to drop a bit of a bombshell on people right now. And this is going to be directed towards the Oath Keepers, people who call themselves constitutionalists, and people who believe in such a thing as states' rights. Now, people are going to like to hear this, but as you know, we deal in reality on this show, thus the name of my own blog, Reality Blogger. But this is straight out of the Nevada Constitution. I want people to understand something very, very clearly. And the Nevada Constitution itself says it the best. Now, this is one of those things where people, you know, we like to talk very fondly about the Constitution. We like to talk fondly about different things and laws and concepts. And we like to speak from our heart. But what we don't often do is face reality. We talk about the way things should be, but ignore the way things are. And that's one of the reasons, again, I had you on the show today. So what is happening out there at that Bundy Ranch out there in the state of Nevada? Well, you're not going to like to hear this, folks, but I hate to tell you this. I hate to be the one. I'm actually making a documentary on it. I haven't been inspired to make a documentary for a while. This has done it because I looked at every state constitution. I also looked at the enabling acts. And it turns out that states aren't really what we think they are. They're just acts of Congress. So I'm going to read straight out of the Nevada Constitution. I invite everybody to go do the same. And I invite you to pull up your own state constitution and find the similar wording. Here is Section 2, so it's right up front. Section 2 of the Nevada Constitution, where it defines the purpose of government and the paramount allegiance to the United States. Remember, when we say the United States, that means Washington, D.C. That is the central government, not one of the states. It's outside of the 50 states. It is actually a foreign entity, if you will, foreign corporation. That's why we call this the corporation nation. Here's what the Nevada State Constitution says, and you better get this through your heads, folks. Quote, all political power is inherent in the people. Well, we have to define the word people. That doesn't mean what we think it does. Government is instituted for the protection, security, and benefit of the people, and they have the right to alter or reform the same whenever the public good may require it. Oh, well, gee, that sounds wonderful, doesn't it? Let's go on. Here's where it gets interesting. But the paramount allegiance of every citizen is due to the federal government in the exercise of all its constitutional powers as the same have been or may be defined by the Supreme Court of the United States. And no power, I say again, from the Nevada Constitution, no power exists in the people of this or any other state of the federal union to dissolve their connection therewith to the United States or perform any act tending to impair, subvert, or resist the supreme authority of the government of the United States. The Constitution of the United States confers full power on the federal government to maintain and perpetuate its existence. In other words, continuity of government. And whensoever any portion of the states, plural, or people thereof attempt to secede from the federal union or forcibly resist the execution of its laws, listen carefully, quote, the federal government may, by warrant of the Constitution, employ armed force in compelling obedience to its authority. Now, folks, that is a very, very healthy dose of reality. Very, very healthy. Let me read that last part again. The federal government may, by warrant of the Constitution, employ armed force in compelling obedience to its authority. There is no such thing as quote-unquote states' rights when it comes to the federal government. Every constitution I've looked in some wording or the other, tells us, for instance, here's Utah, where I live. It says in Section 3 of that Constitution, Utah is inseparable from the Union. The state of Utah is an inseparable part of the federal Union. And the Constitution of the United States is the supreme law of the land. Now, we hear that, and we think, oh, isn't that romantic? Supreme law of the land. Now, as we discussed in previous shows, land does not mean land, does not mean soil. It means corporation. It means the United States government. It does not mean the land. It means that, as Nevada's Constitution stated, it means citizens. It means artificial things. So for those of you who are promoting things that aren't true about the BLM lands, the BLM has every right, legally and lawfully, to do anything it wants on its lands. We'll be back, folks.
Is this real, or is this just ride? The world is like a ride. You think it's real, it's a ride. We can change it anytime we want. It's only a choice between fear and love. The world is like a ride. You think it's real, it's a ride. We can change it anytime we want. It's only a choice between fear and love. Life goes up and down, round and round. It has thrills and chills, and it's very brightly colored. Up and down, round and round, and it's very loud.
All right. Little healthy dose of reality. Yeah, that's hard to read for anybody who's, well, grown up in the United States and went to the, when you read the constitutions, you find out, of course, that the state constitutions, that each state is required to have a government public school where they teach us all this stuff, except they don't seem to teach us that there really is no such thing as a state's rights, that is kind of an illusion, and that the federal government owns about a third of all land in the United States, and it does so because in the enabling acts for each of these states, Nevada specifically, was required to give up all right and title to the unappropriated lands. That means that all of its land, basically, which was about most of its land, about somewhere over 90%, was never in the possession of Nevada. So Nevada has never had control or ownership of its lands that are unappropriated, that are under the BLM, the National Forest Service, and those other things. This is very important because that means, literally, when it says that the people granted this compact, this contract, and granted their lands to the United States, folks, you oath keepers, you militia, you have no actual legal or lawful right to stand against the United States. So if you're keeping your oath to the United States and to the Constitution, well, I hate to tell you this, but that means that you agree with and support the fact that the federal government may, by warrant of the Constitution, employ armed force in compelling obedience to its authority. So we have to rethink our patriotism. We have to consider what Dave and I are talking about today as, well, compelling force to compel obedience. And that's why I have Dave on today. I didn't mean to interrupt our flow there, Dave, but I think it's very important to understand for people.
Well, I think it's really important what you bring up, and let me respond to this, okay? I don't care by what sleight of hand the government bureaucrats think that they've duped us into us being under their control and we have no rights. Government does not grant freedom. God grants freedom. And I serve a higher constitution, and that's the Bible. And when government comes against my right to make my autonomous decisions which affect no one in the negative, then we have a duty and a right on the basis of being a human being to stand up to this tyranny.
Well, unfortunately, for a lot of people, I think that what you also have to say there, Dave, is that that means that you have to actually fight for and protect your own rights. Because, again, they're not granted by a piece of hemp that has a constitution on it. Those are just those rights, so-called, are only things to prevent government from doing certain things. They don't bestow any right upon people. Your rights are either from God under the law of nature, or they stem from a contractual relationship as a citizen. You can't, according to the Bible, serve both God and mammon. Well, I'm afraid that it's time to make a choice, considering what we're talking about today.
Well, they're not going to allow us to remain passive, and a choice is being forced upon us. In their eyes, it's compliance or death. Death is coming to a great number of people. Read the depopulation quotes. We have nothing to lose. Now, I'm basically an advocate of nonviolent change, but I'm also cognizant of the fact that I have the right to self-defense.
A realist.
And I come to the decision here as a reasonable human being that I will not submit to sleight of hand. Thomas Jefferson said it best. These rights are inalienable. They're granted by God. They're not granted by government, a king, a man, a president, an illegal alien occupying the White House. They're granted by God. I do not recognize this authority that is attempting to usurp all of our freedom. And if more of us began to think this way, we could unite and force change, or at least go down fighting like men instead of cowering like the sheep of so many do in this country.
Absolutely. The problem, and I'll say this again, this is my own personal opinion. When people are looking for solutions, when people are looking to see what they can actually do, it's time for groups like the Oath Keepers to actually reverse their stance and say, hey, folks, maybe you shouldn't be keeping your oath to this entity we call Washington, D.C. Maybe it's time to revoke that oath and say, hey, I'm not going to obey an unlawful order and use these energy weapons to kill my own neighbors because they don't agree and they don't want to be controlled. There's a real issue here that I see with that there's a barrier that needs to be broken, and that is this concept of an oath and the concept of breaking that oath as some kind of evil thing when, in fact, you're pledging an oath to a very, very, it's a neutral entity, but it is controlled by very evil things, and therefore you must, by your conscience, at least reconsider, keeping such an oath to such a tyrannical thing that its only purpose is to take away all of your natural liberties, your natural freedoms, and replace them with political ones. Well,
there's another argument here, too, because if we go on the supremacy clause, that the federal constitution is superior and supreme to the state constitution, we set up 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights, which was the guiding light of our government. Now, subsequently, we spent about 230 years trying to undo that good work. But still, under federal law, and I'm talking legitimate federal law, we still have these 10 amendments in theory. They are superior to any state constitution. So, from my perspective, I care not what a conflicting state constitution says if it doesn't fall in line with the intent of the original founders. It's illegitimate. So therefore, the Oath Keepers, if they are pledging their allegiance to the original document that was passed, I think they're being loyal and accurate in their philosophy, not necessarily to the state constitution, as you've aptly pointed out, but to the federal constitution.
Well, see, there's a problem with that, though, don't you think? That goes back to thinking with your heart instead of your brain. That concept of the Founding Fathers and their intent is long gone. I mean, they call it a Civil War Congress for a reason. That's because Congress abandoned today the Congress. Therefore, the United States was destroyed, defeated at that point. It fell apart. The Civil War Congress was a war Congress called together for continuity of government, and that Civil War, according to the United States government, has never ended. So we have a serious problem when it comes to that because, according to the Lieber Code, according to the codification of the Lieber Code, and according to the U.S. government, we're still under the Civil War Congress, which is a de facto militarized Congress that is not the original actual Constitution. So you can talk about the heartfelt concept of patriotism and everything else, but it's just not reality of today. That's sort of why I have a problem with patriotism, oath keepers, because it's not realistic. Obviously,
well, my position runs a little contrary to that, because if we allow ourselves to be trapped into the paradigm of illegitimate actions by government, in which the government gets increasingly more tyrannical, then we're playing the game by their rules and we're destined to lose.
Well, I guess the question then begs, how do you fight government? It's certainly not through the state, because every state admits and is required to obey the federal government. So it gets a little difficult unless you start realizing the Christian nature of the way we should be acting. But we'll continue this after the break.
Hey, neighbor. Welcome again to this neighborhood. I'd like to show you something. You know what this is? Well, maybe if I press this button. There are so many things to learn about in this world, and so many people who can help us learn, and so many people who can help us learn. Did you ever grow anything in the garden of your mind?
Talking about the corporation nation and what it has planned for the good people of America, especially those of us who, are dissenting. A couple of funny comments in the chat room. Again, it's corporationnation.chatango.com. Very simply and elegantly stated, actually, people get the government they deserve. Never a more true statement has been stated. We deserve what we get because we don't do anything about it. We consent. We're silent, which is consent. And then the other one is a nation of sheep will be governed by wolves. Well, there you go. Anyway, let's get back to our these weapons of incredible technology and power. Because again, I think the real point that I'm trying to make, and I think that you are too, according to your article there, is that we don't stand a chance with our guns alone. We need to do something to prevent what's going on. It's hard to put into words, but I guess the point is that we are fooled if we think that our guns alone are going to do anything to stop these weapons that can be fired from space.
They're not operationalized yet, and the operative word is yet. And the one thing that I would also say is that I speak routinely to a few people who have been fired by Obama as senior members of the military. And they have fed me incredibly accurate information over the past 16 months, individually and collectively. And the one thing that they talk about is the fact that the military is ready to break ranks with this administration. They refuse to give Obama control of the nuclear weapons. This is why Obama tried to dismantle the nuclear command. He'll never get control of the nuclear submarines, all 72 of them armed with at least 8 nuclear weapons each that can take out a city. This military opposes Obama, and no matter how many people he seems to fire, he just can't get the right people in their place. But here's what the military people tell me they're waiting for. And this is why the Bundy Ranch is so significant. They're waiting for the people to stand up, because no revolution, no civil war can be complete successfully without the support of the people. And the military is waiting for the right moment to enact a coup. And this has been seriously discussed. In fact, many people have talked about this openly now in the past 3 months. And they're waiting for the people to stand up. And when the people stand up, we'll see positive action. I have a prescription, and it's a dangerous prescription, because military coups usually don't end well for the people. But if we were to have a military coup, and they were to exit this president from office, they were to arrest people in Congress who have seriously violated their oath of action, have acted criminally and illegally. And if we were to temporarily nationalize the banking institutions on Wall Street like Goldman Sachs, we might be able to embark on a path of rebuilding if we would be brave enough to repudiate the debt, point the nukes at the Chinese and say, sorry guys, that was then, this is now. And then hopefully we would have enough, let's say, morality and sensibility that at some point would revert back to a civilian government with tighter controls on public officials. That is not a panacea, what I'm suggesting, and I have to swallow hard on the idea of a military coup. But to think that we're going to win anything back at the ballot box is naive at best.
Absolutely.
To think that we're going to rise up as individual citizens and take our country back with 300 million handguns, sorry, Yamamoto didn't exist with that quote about Americans behind blades of grasses with guns. That was 1941. This is now 2014. If we don't have the military on our side before it's too late, we have no chance.
And see, I agree so completely. But the problem, I guess, the question I'd ask to that statement, and I mean, I can't say I disagree with you, but who then would the military follow as far as a leadership if it weren't the commander-in-chief, as it were? I mean, when we say military, are you talking about the higher-up, Joint Chiefs of Staff and all that, or are you talking about the men on the ground? Because I think the men on the ground are much more important than than even the Chiefs of Staff, because they're the ones that are going to be wielding these weapons.
The idea of a military coup is dangerous because you're talking about martial law initially, and there's no guarantee that freedom would ever be restored, that we would go back to the intent of the original founding fathers, and we might be just trading one form of tyranny for another. I fully am cognizant of that.
Well,
this is our SOS move. This means we're desperate to beg for a military coup because we have no other options.
I want to be very clear again that we are already under martial law. Martial law does not mean violence necessarily. Martial law doesn't have to be violent. Martial law is also just military rule. And when, we say the Civil War never ended, literally they just basically took like so many governments have done, what the Bible did is to take, or the church, I should say, is to take the already existing customs, which in this case would be civil and penal law, according to the Libra Code, and pretend like it still exists. Pretend like the Constitution still has merit and value over everything. But in reality, we've been under a state of martial law or military rule since 1864, 1862?
Yeah, I don't disagree with you on that point, but there are different degrees of martial law. The type of martial law that the Obamanites have planned is to use Russian and Chinese soldiers. The Chinese have been promised hard assets, and the Russians have been promised the plunder. They'll put us in the labor camps. They'll put us in the FEMA camps. They'll exterminate a good number of us. They'll come for our guns. I mean, you name it, the whole thing's going to roll out if this goes according to plan. That's not the kind of martial law we're under today. I'm talking deadly martial law. I'm talking genocidal, Pol Pot kind of martial law, not the soft martial law that we're under today. And I grant you, we are under martial law. Any Congress that can pass the NDAA and snatch and grab off the street, kill you, do whatever they want, that is martial law. But this is a whole lot worse what's coming if we don't stand up now. Well, we have right now inside of our country Chinese and Russian troops operating, and I've proved that 9 times Sunday on my website with pictures, documentation, videos. We are in a great deal of trouble, and times are desperate.
We're certainly in globalism. I don't know if that can just fall under simple globalism or if it's an actual coup d'etat act of war. But, I mean, it seems to me it's more of an organized plan, basically, between all governments. Let's pretend we're against each other, but really, we're all just democracies, and we found out that democracy is the way to control because it's basically the worst type of government you could possibly imagine because it hides the fact that, well, let's take the United States, for example. We mistakenly call, well, not mistakenly, but we call people like Saddam Hussein and other leaders, we call them dictators because they rule singularly. And yet we don't recognize the dictatorship that we have in the United States. The best way to hide a dictatorship is to pretend that you have a democracy, a democratic process of voting and electing and all that, and to pretend that the Congress is there. But what you really have, because the word dictate means to dictate the law. So, I mean, we have a dictatorship. It's just in the form of a executive, legislative, and judicial.
Well, what we have is an oligarchy.
Branch. Yeah,
we have an oligarchy that's out in the open with a Congress and a president that's bought and paid for.
Yeah. I mean, it's really all it is. And I wish, which is again why I have a problem again with the oath. When you have the concept and the understanding and the comprehension, I should say, of that very concept, and as you said, is not something that's going to be fixed at the voting box because, well, government's the main investor also in Diebold. So, I mean, it's a very controlled thing. So not something we could fix at the voting box. I agree with you there. So where can we fix it? That becomes the question. And I agree that this all boils down to the one thing that that all governments require, and that is force. What is force? Well, force is the executive branch. The sheriff is the executive of the county. The governor is the executive of the state, and the president is the chief executive. In other words, in charge of forceful enforcement of the law, forceful coercion. So we don't have a problem. If the legislature wants to create laws and they have no executive force to force those laws on the people, who cares what a judge says is the law? There's no force. So we have to get to these soldiers on the ground, the ones straight out of high school or the ones that fail high school, and on up the ladder. I mean, wouldn't you agree that that's really government can't exist without its executive? That's the bread and butter of the whole control system. So
well, we need to have the noose hanging over the head of government at all times.
Yeah,
and I know Jefferson would agree with that point.
We have to have a law that's actually enforced. We're going to be back for our final segment. Stay tuned, folks.
Derivatives, quantitative easing, trade imbalances, recession, low GDP, nations close to collapsing, and subprime loans, foreclosed homes, and people's taxes spent to bail out too big to fail AAA banks again. Fear levels rising as the US crash seems imminent, having smashed the debt ceiling of 14 trillion despite protests and clashes in Athens streets. The IMF imposed structurally unjust programs in Greece, where in fact the term economy entered our language from the Greek oikonomia.
Well, Dave, I want to thank you. Dave Hodges, my guest today. The Common Sense Show on Sundays. Thanks so much for coming and sharing all this stuff with us. I think this is one of the most important topics we can be talking about. I wanted to ask you one question since you're saying that you talked to these sort of insiders, I guess, if you will, in the military. Does it not frighten you to think, and you kind of alluded to this, I think, does it not frighten you a bit to think that the quote-unquote military coup, if you will, could be one of the best laid plans as controlled opposition? In other words, could it not be that that they want that to happen as far as the world powers?
You raise a good point. I think you're on the money. I can give you dozens of reasons why we shouldn't have a military coup, and I can only give you one reason why we should. And the only reason why we should is I think we're out of options.
It's a scary thought.
I agree. People tell me, Dave, you're crazy. Military coup doesn't usually end very well. And I say, I totally agree with you. But give me another option. What's something else we can do? We almost had a coup over the Benghazi situation, and it's something that I wrote about, and it wasn't until 6 months later did people like Glenn Beck even halfway acknowledge it. And Admiral Guyette, head of Carrier Task Force 3, with drones and F-16s, was going to provide air cover for General Ham to drop in an extraction team and rescue the ambassador and his support team. And Colonel Rodriguez, who was CIA number 2 guy in charge of AFRICOM, arrested General Ham, and the plot was foiled. I was told if they had extracted the ambassador, he would have turned, quote, state's evidence and implicated Panetta, Obama, and Clinton for treason and what was going on with arming al-Qaeda with things like 20,000 RPGs. But Obama avoided the catastrophe But we were within an eyelash of having a successful military coup. Both Guyette and Ham were placed under indefinite house arrest, and now both were drummed out of the military. And amazingly, they said Guyette was drummed out because he made racially insensitive comments. What a bunch of crap. You get to be a commander of a carrier task force, and you can't work with people of color? That's not even believable. But we came close to a military coup then, and I'm told by my sources that those discussions are still being held, but they're waiting for the people to stand up and say, okay, we're with you. So time will tell where this is going to go.
Well, yeah, it's gosh, you know, it's a tough thing to even to really speculate about, because for God's sake, I mean, it's sort of an anything can happen, and you combine the concept of the false flag in there to really get the thing going. You've got a real hotbed.
Well, false flag will definitely set it off, and my vote is for a Chinese EMP. You know, the thing about the Bundy Ranch that got revealed that very few people are talking about it, but I wrote about it. I got a hold of the BLM document. Now, they since scrubbed it off their website, but they actually called the land that Bundy was on a solar energy zone reserved for Chinese energy development. And as I looked at this closer, I found that four other locations have these solar energy zones. It's almost like an Agenda 21 designation, and they lie in proximity to a large military base. They all lie next to a Canamex corridor, so I think the Chinese are going to be given access to controlling our transportation systems. And they also lie near a large energy source like Hoover Dam, the Palo Verde nuclear power plant here in Arizona. I could go on with these comparisons, but we're letting the Chinese, through these solar energy zones, control a good portion of this country, and that's where this is headed. And the Bundy event really revealed all these things. This is much more significant than BLM land and the killing off of cattle and evicting a family. This is about control of all energy in this country.
Yeah, it's, you know, this is sort of the other conundrum I always find kind of strange is it seems like nobody wants to do anything right now. Because everything that's been happening has been incremental. I mean, it's been a brilliantly laid out plan to basically privatize, starting back with Reagan and his buddy Thatcher, the whole privatization plan. Then Bush, of course, passes the infrastructure privatization. And so you've had this great corporate takeover where government has been investing in everything, basically. So you've basically developed a state of fascism where corporations are owned by government, including the banks and everything else, including all those corporations in China and everywhere else. And you've got this globalism that's set up. And as long as it's incremental, people don't seem to think that, or don't want to fight to do anything about it. So I'm not sure. I mean, I'm going to be honest, just to play, I guess, devil's advocate. I'm not sure why government would screw with that plan, because as long as they imply, and the reason they've got so powerful is through incrementalism. So as long as they keep applying incrementalism, I don't know why they'd need to do anything so drastic. You know what I mean?
Well, I submit to you that handing off so much of the country to the Chinese is already underway, and it is incremental, just like you're saying. The inland ports. Who's controlling the inland ports now? International corridors. Well, who's in charge of these international corridors? Increasingly, it's backed by Chinese money. The same as solar energy in this country. The Chinese are gaining a foothold in this country that they're not going to let go. And why are they doing it? Because we owe them so much money.
Yeah. Well, you know, this is that would get into a whole other subject on finance and everything else. But why don't you tell people, we're running out of time real quick, why don't you tell people again where they can listen to your show here on RBN, of course. And
Greatest network in America, and you can hear the Common Sense Show at 9 p.m. Central. We run till midnight. We have great guests, a lot of good discussion. And the website, again, is thecommonsenseshow.com, and it's been my pleasure to be on with you.
Absolutely. Again, the article, in case people are interested, that we're talking about today, written by yours truly, Dave Hodges. It was called "The Window to Resist Tyranny is Closing Due to the New Super Weapons." And I got to give a thumbs up and pretty much a 100% kudos and agreement on your assessment in this, and I strongly suggest that people start looking into these things and start rearranging your thought patterns about what the concept of such things as survivalism and survivalists and all this food storage and stuff. It's great to be prepared, but I think, Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, if you don't know what you're preparing for, all your preparation is going to be for naught.
Well, I'm starting to look at fixed preparation. I think everyone should have enough food and water to survive a catastrophe. But you know what? If you think that you're going to arm your house and build bulletproof shutters and have 3 years of food and water, you might be defending the Maginot Line. And if you know your war history in France, I think people know what I'm talking about. I'm talking to an increasing number of military people or ex-military people that think when the poop hits the fan, the only way to survive is to get on the run. And I've actually started training with my nephew, who's ex-Marine. And he's training me in logistics because I do think there's going to come a time when you're going to want to be where the enemy isn't. And if they come to your neighborhood, you need to get on the run.
Yeah.
You need to learn how to live off the land. You want to be a true survivalist? It's not about storing food and water. It's about learning how to live off the land.
I don't know. I'm starting to think that a true survivalist is someone that's going to actually be able to integrate and pretend that they're the average useful idiot so that they can live on to teach others about the reality of people's situation. I'm starting to think that survivalism in and of itself is going to be more the 1984 type of model where you have to pretend to be taking your ration of drugs, and in the meanwhile, going back to what we're doing now out in the open, which is to teach, to be a teacher of future generations and make sure that this type of conversation that we're having today, this type of life can continue, natural law and everything else. Otherwise, really appreciate you being on the show, my friend.
Oh, my pleasure, and let's keep fighting the good fight.
Alrighty, folks. That was Dave Hodges. Again, the website is thecommonsenseshow.com. Here on RBN, Sunday nights. Oh, boy, we're back with Daniel tomorrow, and he's preparing that letter that he was reading, by the way, that was submitted, by the way, to government. He's going to let me post that on my website, I believe, and so everybody can download it, maybe genericize it a little bit, take out his name and all that. But should have a very interesting conversation. He's kind of ready to spill the beans now that he's gone through the entire process, or at least he believes he has. So join me tomorrow for more Daniel. Thanks for joining me. Take care.